Hello, everybody. This is Jim Robinson, your host at the GWOT FOB podcast, brought to you by Combat Outpost Robinson, doing great things for our veterans. So today we've got another fantastic guest for the show today. This is our second time interviewing her. She was actually here in the States back before Christmas and come into the studio, and we had some audio difficulties. We're doing it from across the pond this time. Today, our guest is a very well-known war correspondent journalist, Lynne O'Donnell. She's joining us today from the UK in London, and she is known for her work covering the Afghanistan war for 20 years. She has worked for reporting agencies such as the AP, the BBC, NPR, and she's been a freelance journalist. She was once actually detained by the Taliban, and she was on the last commercial flight out of Kabul during the withdrawal. So this young lady has seen a lot, and she's been around the world. And Lynne, welcome to the show. And we're tickled to death to have you, and I was very tickled that you traveled all the way to Ohio a few weeks back, and it was just a pleasure to spend the weekend with you.
Thanks a lot, Jim. I'm really glad that I got to come, and we'll just look at that one as the practice run. This one will be much, much better.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you agreeing to come back on this way.
Of course.
Why don't you give our viewers a little bit of background on you, because you actually were born and raised in Australia, and then ended up in China for a while before you went to Afghanistan. So why don't you give us a little background on yourself, what it was like growing up in Australia and how you came to be involved in journalism and end up right in the middle of a war.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I grew up in Melbourne, which is one of the handful of big state capital cities in Australia. Coincidentally, I started my day very early today talking on breakfast radio here in the UK about the fires that are blighting Victoria State, which is where I'm from. And, it's like 43, 45 degrees Celsius. That's about 120 degrees, I guess, Fahrenheit there at the moment. And the place is exploding. And it never got that hot when I was a kid, If it was 36 degrees Celsius, we were complaining about the heat and, the conditions, global warming, climate change. Australia's already at 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer now, hotter than it was in the early 1900s. So climate change is a real reality there. But yeah, I started my career as a journalist on a newspaper that no longer exists the way it did then, called the Melbourne Sun News Pictorial, or the Sun. It was a national newspaper. It was a tabloid, a family newspaper, the biggest selling in the country.
Nice.
And yeah, it was great. And I did what was an old-fashioned cadetship there, like Jimmy Olsen of Superman fame, and which meant I worked on every section of the paper and learned my craft that way. After a few years of that, I decided, and a holiday in China with my parents.
Okay.
Tiananmen Square massacre, as you might recall, 1989 happened, and I decided that I would go to China. So I ended up as a journalist in China for 13 years, and I worked for the wire services and for a newspaper, an Australian newspaper called The Australian. And China was the biggest story in Australia and pretty much the biggest story in the world, really, for journalists and media outlets generally, until 9/11. And after 9/11, because I was a front page newspaper reporter, I'm like, how do I get back on the front page? So then I decided to go and cover the war. And I got to Afghanistan via Uzbekistan in time for the US-led invasion in October 2001, less than a month after the 9/11 attacks. And I kind of liked that, I don't think it's a bad thing to say. As a reporter, I liked the adrenaline and the excitement and the immediacy of covering conflict. And I thought that I could do that pretty well, so I kept doing it. And that led me to Iraq for the 2003 war there, and bouncing around Europe, covering and hunting down, if you like, jihadists and terrorist attacks.
Right.
And then to postings in Afghanistan for Agence France Presse, the French news agency, and Associated Press. And then that segued into covering that region, including the collapse of the Afghan Republic, for Foreign Policy magazine. Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Well, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, you've been around and you've seen a lot. So
yeah, never a dull moment.
I can see that. So what was life like in China? Because that's a communist country.
Yeah, well, it was really very interesting. Those 13 years that I was covering the country were astounding for the scale of change. When I went to visit with my parents in early 1989, I think we were there in January or February, there was an ad in The Sun, the newspaper that I had worked for cheap holidays. Let's fill the planes.
Right.
For winter, and we got there and spent a week, and I found it quite fascinating, but it was still very much a poor country, hardly any cars on the road, only one or two hotels of international standard, bicycles everywhere, men wearing the Mao suits and the caps. And I ended up there 1990, January. I went to work as what was called a foreign expert for a Chinese newspaper that was published in English. And I lived in a little apartment on the compound of the People's Daily, which is the official Communist Party mouthpiece. So I really got a very insightful look at the mechanics, if you like, of the Chinese Communist Party's functioning at a very sensitive time, post-Tiananmen, and also when the Berlin Wall came down the following year, that year, 1990, and how the Chinese basically closed ranks around themselves, how they stepped up repression to make sure that what was happening to the Soviet Union did not happen in China with the Communist Party's power there. So it was very, very interesting. Then I joined Reuters, one of the other big major global news agencies that I spent some time with. I was based in Hong Kong and in Shanghai for them. I covered the emergence of China on the economic front, covering commodities, SOFs, which means agricultural commodities, which you'd be very aware of there in Ohio, and also the metals markets. China became a big buyer of American wheat, soybeans, cotton during that time, and also of copper on the global market. So my job segued from, going and walking around coffee plantations on the border of China and Burma, which of course was fascinating.
I'm sure.
Yes, sensational, to cotton plantations up on the northwestern corner in what used to be, pretty much still are, People's Liberation Army agricultural plantations. They still produce a lot of food for the international and the domestic market. To moving the metals prices on the London Metal Exchange when China came to the market to buy copper and other metals to fuel its economic growth. So it was a really exciting and interesting and dynamic, and if I may say so, important time to be there. It was great.
Oh yeah, absolutely important time. There was a lot going on back then.
Indeed.
All right, let's move on into Afghanistan and the different areas. What area were you in the beginning, and the areas that you traveled through, and were you ever embedded into any of the forward operating bases or the outpost, or just kind of give us an insight into that?
Well, in 2001, covering China as a journalist based there is very difficult. It's a very repressive
I can imagine.
surveillance state, yeah. And what you're doing is you're lurching from set piece to set piece. It's the Communist Party's 70th birthday. It's the handover of Hong Kong from British rule to China. You know, these big things that have to be covered.
Right.
And in between those, you're constantly looking for stories that you can do, and often getting into trouble doing it. Some journalists like to write about themselves being arrested, for things that they've done, but I was never really interested in making myself the story. It happened every now and then, but not because that was the sort of journalism that I was doing.
Right.
But one of the things at that time, that time of the year, I decided I would go to Xinjiang, which is an occupied, if you like, area of China. It's traditionally populated by Muslim people. They call themselves Uyghurs. They are of Turkic nationality and they speak Turkic languages. And their region borders Central Asia and Pakistan. And I thought it might be just interesting to go to Kashgar, which is an old trading post of the Silk Road. So it's very ancient, very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Very colourful. I just go there, find stories as I went.
Right.
And so I flew from Beijing to Urumqi, which is the capital of this particular area called Xinjiang. And I got on a train and was trundling down to Kashgar. I think at the time, no fast trains then. The trip took 2.5 days.
Wow.
And I'd already done a night and I was sitting on my top bunk at 9 o'clock in the morning and the phone rang, and it was the lady who worked for me in my office in Beijing called Xiaoli, and she said, "Hi." And I said, "Yeah, hi." She said, "I just thought I'd call and say hello." She said, I said, "You never call anyone to say hello," because she didn't.
Right.
She wasn't that sort of a person. She
Right.
wasn't "Hi, how's it going?" So what do you want? She said, "Well, I thought you might be interested to know what's happening in America." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, 30,000 people are dead in New York and the president's missing."
Yes.
And then the line went dead. And I thought, what?
Right. Yeah, that would be a huge shock. It was for us as well.
Yeah, well, and you were a lot closer to it. There I was wondering, what the hell?
Yeah.
And so I got down off my bunk and I sat at the little table between the bunks and put my phone on the table and looked out of the window at this sort of undulating black pebble desert, waiting for a signal on my phone because I'm in the middle of nowhere, going across the Taklamakan Desert. And every now and then a little man in the distance on a donkey with a turban, would trot into view across the window. So I'm like, where the hell's he going? Where's he come from? And then 2 hours later, the phone rang and a signal came in, and it was a friend of mine called Ron who lived in Beijing, American, and he said, for some reason, I don't know why I did it, I never do it, I turned on the TV before I went to bed and watched the second plane on CNN slam into the second tower of the World Trade Center.
Right.
And he updated me on what was going on. And I still had something like 18 hours before I arrived in Kashgar.
Right.
Wondering what the hell is going on. So I arrived in Kashgar, put my stuff in my hotel and went to a local tea house, an old traditional tea house made of wood, television in the corner. But by then the authorities had ordered all the TV stations not to show the footage anymore. So I still had no real idea of the magnitude of what had happened. But the Uyghurs in this traditional tea shop certainly did. They were very, very concerned.
As they should have been, yeah.
Well, that this was going to be used as an excuse by the Chinese authorities to crack down further. You go around these towns we're talking 25 years ago now, these towns in what the Chinese called minority areas, and Tibet is the same, Inner Mongolia, places where there were, until, the middle of last century, no Han Chinese people, have basically become sinicized. There's a part of the city where there's a huge statue of Mao, and, they're basically forcing the demolition of traditional tea houses and homes, and very seriously monitoring the mosques. And the local people knew that this was going to be an excuse for further scrutiny and security by the Chinese communists there.
Yeah, and there was a huge amount of anger, as you could well, think, here in the U.S. towards Muslims at that time as well. There were some attacks on some mosques and stuff, and people just don't realize that not all Muslims are radical.
No, but give an organization, an entity like the Chinese Communist Party, yet another excuse to crack down on people who aren't quite like us.
Exactly.
And what they have done since is incarcerate wholesale young Uyghur men who are locked up in, what do they call them, re-education camps. They kill, murder Uyghur men. They sterilize the women. It has been what the US government, in its, it does an annual report on religious and ethnic crackdowns worldwide. America, a long time ago, declared the way Uyghur people are treated in China to be a genocide, and it's a genuine genocide.
Right.
And it's ongoing. It's a terrible, terrible repression, and it is just ignored. Muslim countries, Islamic countries never, ever peep about what the Chinese are doing to Muslim people. It's shameful.
Right. Well, they're afraid to.
No, it's all about money. The Pakistanis won't say anything because the Chinese pump billions of dollars in there. Central Asians don't see it because the Chinese pump billions of dollars in there. It's all about, they're not afraid of anything but not getting the money.
Well, that's a shame right there.
Yep.
Okay, so let's get into your actual time in Afghanistan.
Yeah, so there I was on the Chinese border with Pakistan, but nobody gave a damn about China. After 9/11, it's like, I'd ring up my news editor, hey, we're busy.
Right.
No. So how do you get back on the front page? How do I get back on the front page? Well, I got on a plane, and I went to Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan, and I drove down to the Afghanistan border, and I waited for the Uzbeks to put on a barge and let about a dozen international journalists who had slowly followed me down to the same place, and they opened the border eventually, and we got in. I think the Uzbeks did a deal with the Northern Alliance, and we went down the Amudarya, the river that constitutes the border between Afghanistan and the Central Asian stands, and went to Mazar-i-Sharif and got there in time for the US-led invasion, the arrival of the Allies.
Okay.
That coincided with a siege. It's called the Siege of the Kalajangi, if anybody cares to look it up. The Kalajangi was a big mud fort with tessellated walls, looks like an old medieval castle.
Oh, wow.
That is the seat of power for the Uzbek warlord general, or now marshal. He became a marshal under the Republic government, Rashid Dostum.
Mm-hmm.
And the Americans ended a siege there, which had been begun just as I arrived, because the Afghans, the Northern Alliance, had collected prisoners, Taliban prisoners, put them in trucks without disarming them, and brought them from a neighbouring province into Mazar-i-Sharif, into Balkan. Mazar-i-Sharif is the capital of the province, and taken them to Dostum's fort. And there was a man who subsequently became famous, a CIA operative called Johnny Span. And they saw him, an Uzbek and Dari, and probably also Pashto-speaking guy who was advising the Northern Alliance ahead of the invasion that was to come. The Taliban saw him there giving orders, and up go the Shalwar Kameezes, out come the AK-47s and the RPGs, and they started fighting with their captors. They killed Johnny Span and a few others and took over the fort, and basically laid siege there for a week until the Americans fired an ICBM, likely from the Gulf, into the middle of this fort and put a stop to most of the fighting. There were still some Taliban guys who were in the basement, if you like, the arms cache beneath the Kalajangi, and they were still fighting on. And so the Northern Alliance guys flooded the basement chambers with freezing cold water from the surrounding agricultural fields and flushed them out, literally.
Wow.
And it took 4 or 5 days. It was a really fascinating episode to witness. And when I did go into the fort, once it was declared safe to go in, although it wasn't.
Right.
The scene was really quite astounding. Men cut down running by this bomb. As I had sat bolt upright, it happened just at dawn, I guess. I heard a huge explosion in my seat, sat in my sleep and sat bolt upright in my cot in this hotel that I was staying at about 15 kilometres away from the Kalajangi, in time to see a massive mushroom cloud of smoke and dust just, churn up over the horizon. I watched this with fascination, and this was in the days before we were all armed with iPhones, so I have no photographs of it, and got up and raced down there in time to see the carnage that it had wrought inside the Kalajangi. It was really fascinating. And that was my first experience of conflict. It was terrifying and exciting and interesting and got me back on the front page. So it served its purpose as well.
Well, I could imagine the terror and the adrenaline and the excitement and all that. I'm glad I never got to experience, but I can imagine it.
Well, then it becomes addictive because it's, especially after so long covering China, where you're sort of sitting there going, where can I go? Where can't I go? What's happening next?
Right.
And I did travel around China an awful lot, but it's such an over-surveilled place that journalists are the enemy of the people. Chinese journalists work for the party, so they assume that we work for our governments as well, which of course we don't generally. And being able to do something exciting and interesting and front page worthy again was very exciting, and I decided that that's what I wanted to do.
Okay.
Next.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you for doing it. Okay. So where did you go inside Afghanistan after that first initial confrontation?
Well, it was quite a while after that I went back to Afghanistan. The Uzbeks were very strict. If you don't come back at the end of your 1-week visa,
oh, okay,
we're not letting you back in. So I did the right thing and I went back into Uzbekistan. Most of us who'd gone in to Afghanistan on that condition did. And I went back in 2009. I was posted as the Kabul bureau chief for the French news agency. I'd been working for them at that stage as an editor in Hong Kong, and I had wanted to go to India. I had joined on the condition. I had said, okay, I'll accept your job offer as long as, I end up as the news editor in India. Well, of course, they lied because everybody does.
Right.
And when the time came, they posted me instead to Kabul. Now, President Obama had said just a little earlier that Afghanistan was the good war, which was an indication to me that this was going to be America's next major involvement militarily. And that meant that it would be the biggest story in the world for the foreseeable future. Right. And that was fine by me. So I accepted the offer of being posted to Afghanistan as AFP's bureau chief in Kabul. And it was nonstop the whole time that I was there. And then I moved from AFP to Associated Press. AP, I was the bureau chief there as well. And so I basically covered the arc of the peak, I think, of the war, America's war, especially in Afghanistan.
And how long were you in Kabul?
Well, I was there until 2017.
So you were there quite a while then.
Yeah, I was in and out over that time, and I started receiving death threats. The Associated Press, unfortunately, didn't take them seriously enough. They were traced back to personnel within my bureau.
Oh, that's not good.
No, tedious. Like it's like,
Right.
grow the fuck up, guys.
I
They
hear
didn't
you.
like. But you have, there were 40 Afghan men in my bureau.
Okay.
And in any group of 40 Afghan men, there is going to be, let's say, 10 or 12% who are going to be radicals.
Right.
So these guys were working for APTV. They didn't like the fact that I was a foreigner. They didn't like the fact that I was a woman. I was the only woman there, the only foreigner there. They didn't like the fact that we were doing well, that we were covering absolutely everything from the war as it rolled out over the country to the entire gamut, to abuse of boys, and that happens.
Right.
It's a reality there. So they didn't like all of that. So they started sending me death threats.
Okay.
And so everybody got involved, the FBI, the CIA, the Australian intelligence, the Kabul police, the Afghan intelligence agencies, everybody was like, where's it all coming from?
Right.
And it was those who cared and looked into it seriously, traced the threats back to personnel in the Bureau. And so about a year after that, I decided if AP isn't going to, take it seriously, then I think maybe I should leave. And so I just said, okay, I had wanted to stay longer, but I didn't feel like the company had my back. And so I decided that I would leave. And so I left in 2017. I came back to London, where I have an apartment, and I started working I went and got a master's degree in war studies at King's College London.
Nice.
And then we had COVID a little while after that.
Right.
I graduated into COVID. And then as soon as we were able to travel again, as soon as travel restrictions were lifted in early 2021, I went back to Afghanistan. I picked up with my friend and colleague, Masood Hosseini, who had won a Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography in 2012.
Right.
He was also freelancing at that stage, and we together covered the last months of the.
Right. Let's back up a little bit. Give our viewers a little bit of insight into how the Taliban treat women over there, because it's horrendous.
Yeah. Yes, it is horrendous. It's unimaginable. And when I was first posted to Kabul with the French news agency, one of the big deals was, Hillary Clinton and Laura Bush both sought to find civilian support for the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, post 9/11, even though, they had global goodwill and NATO's support under Article 5, by saying we also want to liberate the women.
Right.
And, you started hearing wholesale just how awful it was for the women. Now, when you get onto a trope like that, and also from somebody like me, who has experienced misogyny my whole life, and certainly my whole career in various forms, that has, been barriers to advancement or promotion or pay rises or movement, you kind of think, yeah, okay, well, I know what misogyny is. How much worse can it be?
Right.
And then when I got there in 2009 with AFP, I went around the country and did a series of feature stories with Masood on the life and conditions for Afghan women.
Right.
And I started to understand that it is almost impossible to understand what real repression is unless you have experienced it.
Right.
Or talked with people who experience it, or really studied how that impacts their life and their mentality and everything about their human experience. And it really is horrendous. Even during the Republic time, it's a mentality, it's an approach that is justified unjustifiably, in my view.
Oh yeah, mine as well.
By a recourse to religion, recourse to tradition, recourse to bullshit excuses like we really respect women.
Right.
So, we don't let them leave the home, or we don't let them work, or we don't let them, wear what they want, do what they want, go where they want. When Masood and I were covering the final months of the war, we were hearing reports that areas that the Taliban had already conquered were experiencing a return to the bad old days of the Taliban. So even though traditionally, women in Afghanistan have always been treated with appalling inequality and misogyny, at least under the Republic, 20 years of the Republic, after 2001 and the Taliban were kicked out of power, girls were encouraged to go to school, and millions of them did across the country.
Right.
Girls went to university, they got degrees, they were able to take scholarships and grants and go abroad and travel, to work, to set up their own companies, to be doctors and dentists, to seek health care freely. So all of those things were encouraged and supported and were gaining ground, I believe, under the Republic. So you had a couple of generations of Afghan women and girls who had an inkling of what normality is. And then what we were hearing, as I was saying, was as the Taliban crept back, areas that they were taking control of were reverting back to this interpretation that has no real standing in Islam either, let alone,
now
global norms.
Was the change that you're referring to right now, did that come after the Doha Agreement or before?
Well, the Doha Agreement, which was signed bilaterally by Trump's administration and the Taliban, that was signed in February 2020.
Right.
And that basically gave the Taliban the green light, because the major condition
That's where I'm going.
the major condition of that agreement was that the Americans would pull out by a certain date in 2021, 100%, not just militarily, but civilian pullout as well.
Right.
And also, we've got to remember that there were about 30,000 civilian contractors, mostly former military men and women, who were fixing the planes and training the Afghan military and making sure that the helicopters stayed in the air and, they knew how to use American military equipment, basically kept the war going for the Afghan military that had also cost, by the way, $80 billion of American taxpayers' money to train and equip and clothe and boot and, whatever else. It was America's project. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So President Trump coming into office for his first term, wanting to end America's involvement in foreign wars, did this deal with the Taliban, utterly bypassing the Afghan government, which had been supported by American and NATO members and partners for 20 years at great cost in blood and treasure for all.
Yes.
And also bypassed the Afghan people, who were slowly being permitted to become a democratic nation.
Right.
Flawed elections, but elections nevertheless, that millions of Afghans did leave their homes to queue up to vote in.
Right.
All of that was just ignored. Trump wanted to end the war, and so he signed this deal.
Right. Well, he also signed it without the U.S. Congress knowing about it as well.
Exactly. Secret. Well, it was just a unilateral bullshit deal, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I will tell you up front, as I told you when you came to visit, that agreement stirred up so much anger within me, because I shared with you that I lost my oldest son in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Junior. Rest in peace.
Yes, thank you. And for him to just hand everything back over to the very people that we've been fighting with all these years, that just devastated me.
I'm not surprised.
It was a total betrayal to every man and woman from the U.S. that ever got involved with anything to do with Afghanistan.
And all the others.
Yes.
They weren't consulted.
Yes.
Everybody was betrayed by that.
Right.
everybody.
I mean, the British, the French, Canadians, I mean,
Australians.
the Australians. Yeah.
Even Mongolians, there were Fijians as part of that operation,
Right.
it was a global effort pulled together in the wake of 9/11 to
Right.
support America, and everybody was just kissed off.
Yeah. I mean, for the life of me, don't understand as a U.S. citizen, I don't understand how we let that happen. I mean, and I'm overwhelmed really
Yeah.
by the stupidity on our part to let it happen.
Well, it's not on our part. You can't not let something happen if you don't know that it's about to happen.
Well, and that's just it. That's just it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, let's move up a little bit. Past the Doha Agreement and everything. There's a lot going on. You're back over there again to cover the withdrawal in 2021, and at some point, you got arrested by the Taliban.
No, that was after. That wasn't during the
Okay.
war at all.
Okay.
So I covered, by the time I got into Afghanistan in early 2021, the withdrawal was well underway. There was
Okay.
one afternoon I sat on the rooftop of a house on a hill overlooking the US embassy and diplomatic compound down there, and just watched the Chinooks taking off. They'd lift off from the helicopter ground in the NATO base, and they'd go over to the airport, and they were taking, that evacuation was well underway.
Okay.
And by the time I got there, there were about 2,500 US troops left. As the contracts came up, they weren't renewed. And so fewer and fewer helicopters and the little Super Tucanos that were being used as fighter jets were able to stay in the air. The Taliban were essentially energized, and they were being reinforced from the madrasas along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. As you would be aware, Pakistan was a huge supporter of the Taliban.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't go to Kandahar at that stage, but I have a friend, a Japanese photographer called Morsal, who did go to Kandahar, and she'd been living in Afghanistan for decades by then, and she decided to see what was happening up on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. So she went to Kandahar, and she said, you've got all these guys just coming over through the border passes from the Pakistani madrasas. She said it's like a zombie army. They are reinforcing a couple of times a day.
Right.
And so basically the borders were open, the madrasas were emptied out, the Taliban were being reinforced across the country, and their strategy was very, very easy to see. They started taking first the easy ones, they closed all the border points.
Right.
So nothing was coming in, nothing could go out. And then they started to strangle from the outside in. And as they didn't take any provincial capitals at first. They started taking districts around the provincial capitals, so strangling the main urban centres. And there were rumours coming out from all of these places, especially up north, that as the Taliban took over, they closed down media organisations because everywhere had its own local newspapers and radio stations, and they started closing the girls' schools.
Right.
And so nobody had really been able to confirm what was going on with the women especially. And because Masood and I were both freelancing at that stage, we could move around freely. If you're working for the big media organisations, you have to be insured. And
Right.
to be insured, you have to have a security clearance, and they hire these former soldiers who don't really know from security, and their default, and they certainly don't know the landscape. And their default position on every request is no, because if they say no, then you can't do anything that might get into trouble, and that's not going to come back on them, blah, blah. So we didn't have that burden. We just went to where we wanted to go. And so we went to places where we did almost get into a lot of hairy situations, but we also got some really fantastic and groundbreaking stories.
Right.
Including one right in the center of the country, where we went to Bamiyan City, which is the capital of Bamiyan province, which had liked to pronounce itself safe from the Taliban throughout the war, even though it wasn't. It was just good marketing.
Mm-hmm.
We interviewed the governor, and he told us about a particular valley in a very remote part of the province called Saigon, where the Taliban had come in. They'd taken over and taken control of the place for 4 days before the local militia, there was no army presence there, before the local militia had pushed them out. And during that time, they had ordered the mullahs to announce from their mosques, the loudspeakers,
right,
that every household had to deliver to them a list of all the women and girls, all the female members of the household.
Exactly.
And the reason they were going to do that was because they were going to be married off to Taliban fighters as a reward for spoils of war. Khanat, they call it.
And a lot of people here don't realize that that's one of the things the Taliban did. Was they took the women from the different villages and they forced them to marry in to the different tribes.
They're still doing it.
Exactly.
They're still doing it today.
Exactly. And
4 years later.
It's not just the Taliban. It's the Haqqanis. It's ISIS-K. It's Al-Qaeda, the TTP. It's all of them.
Well, and we know that when ISIS had its own state, they kidnapped girls, for instance, Kurdish girls and Yazidi girls, and they had sex slave markets. As difficult as it is to get your head around that medieval concept, that's what they do.
Right.
And in Afghanistan, even today, girls are being forced into marriage. Girls, little girls, are being forced into marriage with Taliban figures.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we blew that up, Foreign policy really did a huge spread with fantastic pictures from by Masood and my copy, and it was an absolute bombshell. Masood likes to say we dropped a bomb on the Taliban. That's how he described it. And we really did. It was explosive because it confirmed everything, because Afghan people know what the Taliban are. Nobody was listening to them. You still had American government leaders, including the current president, Trump. You had generals, you had British politicians and military leaders saying, the Taliban have changed. We can work with them. They're just country lads.
Yes.
To their shame. And we were interviewing and talking to people, writing about it every day. And because we were able to do this groundbreaking stuff, eventually it got to the point where we were on television and radio worldwide all the time, telling people the reality of what was going on. And the politicians and the generals, they didn't want to know. They just wanted to get out.
And the same thing was happening here in the U.S. People were being told that the Taliban had changed. Mm-hmm. They're good people now. They're working with us. They're trying to do right. Yep. And it just blows my mind that the people of the U.S. was dumb enough to believe that.
I doubt very much that they were dumb enough to believe it. I'm pretty sure they knew that they were being gaslit or gaslighted, whatever the word for it is.
I wonder. I really do wonder.
I wonder too, but I also think that, political and economic realities have changed society so much over the last few decades.
Great deal.
That a lot of people just don't have the energy or the bandwidth to worry about what's going on over there, because they're just trying to make ends meet over here.
Yes.
Here, now. And so I don't blame people. I blame the people who knew and lied about it.
Right.
They knew and they lied about it.
Right. Right. Tell us a little bit about when you were arrested by the Taliban, because
that was a year later.
They made you kind of recant some of the stuff that you had reported, and almost cost you to miss your flight out of Afghanistan, from what I understand.
No, you've got your sequences wrong.
I got them backwards. Okay.
Yep. So what happened was, during this time covering the end of the war, Masood and I were in Herat, which is a big city in the west. It's the capital of Herat province, which borders Iran. And I knew that Masood had a visa for Holland. We went to Herat for 2 days. We got trapped there for 5 days. We were covering basically the collapse of Herat city.
Okay.
And Herat's a very important city. And I said to Masood, one evening we're sitting in the foyer, the lobby of our hotel, and we were up high and we were watching the firefights on the outskirts of a city that was now under curfew. Every big city was under curfew. And so, from bustling to nothing after dark. I said to Masood, we're watching Herat fall, and after Herat, Helmand will fall, Lashkargah, Kandahar will fall, and then Kabul. So you really have to decide what you're going to do.
Right.
And his visa expired on the 1st of August. So we were in Herat. We got there on the 2nd of August, and we were pinned down basically to the 5th. And we decided, he said, you can't really turn up on a visa that expires the next day. You have to look as if you want to be there.
Right.
So when we got back to Kabul, we went to the offices of Turkish Airlines. It was empty. I had a ticket out to Istanbul and back to London on the 9th of September, because one of the dates that had been mentioned for the drawdown to zero was the 9/11.
Right.
And I thought, okay, everything's going to go to hell on the anniversary, so I'll get out before that. So we went back, and because of Masood's visa, we bought tickets out on the 15th, and totally coincidental, of course, we had no idea. A couple of days after that, Masood said to a mate of his, you really should be getting a ticket out of here because look what's happening. Walls were closing in. And he took this friend of his to the Turkish Airlines office, and he said there were 1,000 people there trying to get tickets out.
I'm
so
sure.
We were very, very lucky. And also because of the work that we had been doing, he and I had both been declared high-value targets by the Taliban. We were being trolled, abused, chased, hunted down. We were really in their sights. And so we thought, yeah, let's go. NPR asked me if I would stay, and I said no, because I didn't.
That was a good decision.
Well, I could see that Kabul was going to be under siege. People were flooding into Kabul from all over the city. Journalists were coming in from everywhere. People were you couldn't move on the streets. It was gridlock. You couldn't get a room in a hotel. People were camping out in the public parks. People were fighting over blankets. We saw an old man and a young guy in the street outside a public park where people were camping, fighting over a carpet. And we just looked at each other and thought, whoa, we are so lucky to be getting out of here.
Yes.
And so we didn't know, of course, the sequence, but that was a Sunday. Masood came to pick me up, and we went to with the help of NPR, because I'd said no, we've got tickets, we're going to leave. They offered us a secure passage to the airport. Thank you, NPR, forever.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And all security in the city had collapsed. Evaporated. Kabul had been a city where every 300 meters there was a military checkpoint, all gone.
Right.
We got there for a flight that was scheduled to take off at 8:30. The airport was calm. People were queuing. It was very subdued. There were reporters there who we knew, seeing who was leaving. There were people in the waiting room for that flight that we were surprised to see. And we got on the flight, and it took off 40 minutes late, 9:10 a.m., wheels up. 6 hours later, we touched down in Istanbul, turned on our iPhones to find out that the Taliban had entered the city. The president and his coterie, Ashraf Ghani, and his coterie of senior advisors had fled. They'd run away.
Yes.
And there was nothing left. And we just felt so relieved, so terrible for what was happening for people who were left behind.
Yes.
But also relieved because Masood especially, he would have been hunted down and killed without a doubt.
Without a doubt.
So we spent the next year, I spent the next year extremely busy covering what was going on in Afghanistan, etc., etc. And then I decided for the anniversary, the first year anniversary, if you could call it that, of the Taliban's takeover, to go back and do a series of stories for Foreign Policy magazine. Because really what had happened with the evacuation and the horrific scenes that we can still remember around that had really overshadowed any coverage. The Taliban had very deftly declared themselves to be enemies of ISIS, and so they were working with the, by then, Biden administration on counterterrorism.
Right. So supposedly.
Spare me, supposedly.
Right.
And it was all very, calculated, manipulated. Even that bombing at the airport, I think, was a Haqqani Al-Qaeda operation for all the hallmarks. Yep. So I went in 2022 in July. I went back. I got a visa at the embassy. They made me sign an affidavit to say anything that happened to me was not their fault. And I went back. I did all the things you're supposed to do. I registered myself at the airport, etc. And within a couple of days, the Taliban had tracked me down, and they came to my guest house and they detained me at gunpoint, took me to their Secret Service General Directorate of Intelligence headquarters, and they held me there and interrogated me and forced me to sign a confession that everything that I had ever written about anybody anytime at all was wrong. I didn't know who I was, what I was talking about. I had no contacts. It was all bullshit.
Right.
And they also took particular exception to a number of specified stories, including the one about the sex slavery that we'd done in Bamiyan, another about how they treat homosexuality and LGBTQ people generally. They named those stories by headline. What have they got in common? Sex, right? So they've got a little bit of a thing going on about that. And I was directly threatened. The spokesman for the foreign ministry threatened to have me killed. He was abusive. He called me a white supremacist colonialist, perhaps, a man with a New Zealand passport and family living in Hamilton, a city in New Zealand, said that to me with an Irish name. It's like, it was really quite an experience and very revealing of the mentality behind the people who now control Afghanistan.
Right. Wow. Well, we've covered quite a bit.
We have.
And I know you're busy, and I know it's getting close to dinner time over there now. So
it is a bit.
We'll go ahead and wrap this up. And before I let you go, I want to let you know that I cherished the time that I had with you when you was here. I had a blast with you. You're welcome here anytime. And before we go, is there anything that we did not talk about or cover that you would like to shed some light on?
Well, I think we've covered a hell of a lot of ground.
Yes,
and
we did. Yes, we did.
I'm very, very grateful to you for your time and for taking an interest in my work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I had a wonderful time in Middletown, Ohio as well. It was a fantastic experience. I loved meeting you and all your colleagues on your wonderful charity and
right.
The Veterans of Foreign Wars Club. That was really wonderful. And I'm very grateful to you. I think, Jim, this is an ongoing story. And I think that Afghanistan under the Taliban has become the centrifugal point of jihadism globally.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
And I think that even though it's well documented and reported by people like me, it's being ignored to the detriment, I think, of many people. I mean, there are people who say the next 9/11 is coming.
Yes.
It might be, but I don't think that we will see a spectacular. I think that what we are seeing is an infiltration of Western capitals and countries by jihadism that has its feet in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda has been reinvigorated. It has like 24 other transnational terrorist organizations. It has its feet firmly planted in Afghanistan.
Yes.
It is running training camps for jihadists from all over the world, including the Middle East and Africa. Al-Shabaab is part of that, and it is taking over countries in Africa, as we know, Mali, Somalia, etc.
Right, right.
When the Taliban took over, they were congratulated by Hamas and Al-Qaeda and by the then Prime Minister of Pakistan,
yes,
Imran Khan, who is in prison, it must be said, but is an Islamist, and people don't like to hear that about him. I think that when we see pro-Hamas demonstrations in American cities and European cities, we should make those people stand to account for what it is that they are supporting, which is terrorism,
yes,
anti-Semitism, misogyny, and anti-Western values, anti-humanism. And I think that all of this is being ignored, and the narrative has been captured by Qatar, by Al Jazeera, and by other apologists worldwide. And really, we have to get on the right side of history, because they are not.
I totally agree with you on that. So, all right.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your time, Jim.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and end it then. And like I said, I want to thank you. I want you to keep up the good work and keep those articles and stories coming. I know I enjoy looking at them and reading them, and I've learned quite a bit from you and your articles and stuff. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
And again, you're always welcome.
We will meet again. Thank you.
And I want to say that you've got a friend for life right here.
Thank you. And vice versa.
Yes,
thank you so much, Jim.
It's 15/2010. It's approximately 18:30 in the evening here at Forward Operating Base Forest. Please tell me your name and your rank, sir.
My name's Corporal Jimmy Robinson.
Congratulations, you just got promoted here. First time being promoted away from the States?
No, I got promoted to PFC during my first deployment.
So this is your second deployment, is that right?
Actually, my third.
Your third. First one in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I've done 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan.
All right, tell me, what's your job?
My job, I'm a fire team leader, Alpha team leader under Sergeant Riley.
And how old are you, sir?
27.
How long have you been in the Army?
I've been in a little bit over 5 years.
Well, where do you hail from?
Originally from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Home of the Bengals, is that right?
That's right.
I was speaking with Sergeant Riley earlier, and he spoke quite highly of you. You guys look like you have a really tight group here.
Yeah, it's we're all really close. We're all pretty good friends across the board.
You have family back home?
Yeah, I've got a wife and 2 kids back at Fort Campbell.
Congratulations, and their names?
Thank you. My wife's name's Kate, and my oldest daughter is Emily, and youngest is Tori.
Anything you want to say to them?
I love you guys. I miss you.
Very good. Corporal Robinson, congratulations on your promotion.
All right, thank you very much.
And be safe out here.
I'll try.
It's Jim Sperry, August 15, 2010, at the promotion of Corporal Robinson. Corporal, what's your first name again?
It's Jimmy.
Jimmy. That's an easy name to remember. My name's Jim.
It works, huh?
All right, roger that, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Congratulations.